There's no doubt that being a police officer is a difficult and dangerous job. In California, however, suspects are killed by police at a rate above the national average. Indeed, California's rate is the highest among states with a population of 8 million or more, and a disproportionate share of those being killed are Black and Latino. Recently, the legislature passed laws that attempt to limit police use of deadly force. How will this change impact police officers, the public generally, and minorities in particular? We'll ask Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters, Ron Lawrence with the California Police Chiefs Association, and Alice Hoffman with the California chapter of the NAACP.
BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us. Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. From the California Channel at the state capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Some are asking the question, do the police need to be policed, particularly when it comes to the use of deadly force? Our guest is Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters and host of Force of Law podcast on criminal justice. We'll talk about that a little later, but welcome back to the Maddy Report. So what caused this concern? What's the driving force behind the legislation?
You know, there's been a growing movement over, I would say, the last decade with growing public awareness about police shootings, and a lot of that comes out of the technological changes we've seen in the last decade between everyone having a video camera in their pocket and a lot of people using social media. And so public awareness about police use of deadly force has just really exploded, and the shooting specifically of Stephon Clark in Sacramento, which
got a lot of visibility.
It really became sort of a political tipping point in the state capitol.
And that was a person who was shot in his grandmother's backyard.
Correct. And he was not armed, but the police thought he was holding a gun, but it turned out to be a cell phone. So between all those factors, that really created a sort of a political momentum that there hadn't been previously in Sacramento.
Yeah, so who was pushing for it and who was pushing against it? And I don't understand that Black Lives Matters was also involved in this, but they backed away at some point. So why did they back away?
So initially, Black Lives Matter, the ACLU, and many other civil rights groups were pushing for it. The police were heavily against it. Law enforcement through and through was opposed. As it went through the process in the legislature, the bill changed, and they basically struck a compromise that caused law enforcement to go neutral. They never became supportive of it, but most of the largest statewide law enforcement groups went neutral on the bill. But Black Lives Matter was unhappy with the compromise, felt the bill became too weak, and they, in the end, pulled off their support. Again, they also weren't opposed, they just sort of stopped being a supporter.
Okay, so this new only when necessary standard replaced what was called, the when reasonable standard when it came to deadly force used by police. But what constitutes only when necessary? It hasn't been defined. And so what do experts think what's going to qualify for that standard?
So the bill says that use of deadly force is allowed when necessary in defense of human life, and exactly how they're going to define necessary will over time be defined by the courts. Okay. So it's true that it's not defined in the bill, but what is the biggest change that experts see in this legislation is that it's going to allow decision makers, which includes police chiefs, prosecutors, judges, juries. It's going to allow them, when they are deciding whether a use of force was justified, it's going to allow them to consider the moments that led up to the shooting, not just the moment of the shooting itself. Okay. And that's a real difference, because it's supposed to encourage police to de-escalate situations. What were they doing in the minutes leading up to the need for deadly force? And did they themselves do anything that created the danger that led to the deadly force?
So they're talking about the totality of the circumstances, and not just the moment of, but things that led up to it. And so de-escalation techniques are obviously going to be really important in this as well, right? You don't run to deadly force, and police, I don't think, as a general rule, do, but that's the concern. Only use deadly force when it's absolutely necessary.
Correct. Okay,
so a month after limiting the use of deadly force by police, Governor Newsom signed a companion bill, SB 230, that would finance for new training and require police departments to upgrade their policies. What are the specifics of that bill?
So that bill was brought by law enforcement. It was sponsored by major law enforcement groups in the state, police chiefs, police officers, CHP. And initially, at the beginning of the year, that bill was set up as sort of a rival to the other one.
It got subsumed, though.
Well, what happened was, as they both went through the process, they both changed,
Right.
and they were basically changed in a way to complement each other instead of compete with each other. And so the other bill we were discussing, lays out the legal standard. This one lays out the training requirements, the expectations for what departments, what policies local departments will have, and sort of sets up the expectation of training for de-escalation, training for mental health awareness, and other kinds of training that honestly law enforcement have been asking for a long time.
Okay, so one of the questions here is this going to make officers more or less safe? Some are saying, an officer might be worried about they might get sued because they use deadly force. Is it going to make it more likely that officers are going to be in harm's way because of this law?
That was a concern with the early versions of the bill. The major law enforcement groups were no longer concerned about that with the final version of the bill. And when you look at the language in there, deadly force is allowable when necessary in defense of human life, and that human life could be another person or the officer. So there's really no reason why an officer confronted with a deadly situation couldn't use deadly force.
Let me ask you this. We talked about your podcast early on. I want to get back to that. Why this podcast, and tell our audience a little bit about your podcast, Force of Law.
Thanks for asking. It's called Force of Law, and the idea was to sort of follow this issue as it moved through the legislature all year by telling the stories of people on both sides of the debate. And so we've gone really deeply into the stories of some of the families who lost loved ones to police shootings and who were coming up and testifying and filling the hearing rooms all year with their stories. And we also told stories of some of the families of fallen law enforcement officers who were really afraid that this bill could be harmful to them. So the podcast, I'm doing episodes once a month. And we're going to be wrapping up in the next couple months, but there's a bunch of them. They're on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. So please check it out, Force of Law.
That's great. Well, thank you. Up next, we're going to talk about the future of criminal justice. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. For much of the year, the criminal justice reform conversation centered around changing the legal standard for the police use of deadly force. But that wasn't the only thing that happened. We're talking with Laurel Rosenhall with CALmatters and host of the Force of Law podcast. There was another bill, AB 1215, that banned the use of facial recognition by police officers. This was substantially watered down over time as it went through the process. What were the reasons behind this bill? And if it's signed by the governor, what would it do?
Yeah, this was an interesting issue. This technology is not currently in use in California, but it is being tested in other places. And it allows law enforcement to take footage from their body cameras and using facial recognition software, match it up to other databases. So for law enforcement, it could be a very effective tool for identifying suspects, being able to figure out who's who, where they live, and whatnot. But there are questions about how accurate the technology is, and there are people who are concerned that it could just sort of create this sort of police surveillance state. And so there was this proposal to outright ban the technology in California. That didn't fly, but the bill was amended over time, and in the end, what passed out of the legislature was basically a 3-year pause. So it disallows this technology for the upcoming 3 years.
Yeah, because I'm not sure that technology is there yet. That was a big concern. So let me ask you this. What do you see in the horizon legislatively, politically, when it comes to criminal justice?
Well, next year on the ballot, there's going to be a couple big criminal justice issues that voters are going to weigh in on. One is a referendum that would repeal the state's ban on cash bail. So you may remember that Jerry Brown signed a bill that would prohibit the use of cash bail, really changing our bail, our sort of pre-trial system for how we hold people before they go to trial. And there's a referendum to overturn that ban.
The bail bonds are the companies.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're really behind it.
Yes.
The insurance companies and the bail bond companies that would be impacted by that.
Right.
And then there's another initiative that's seeking to roll back some of the criminal justice reforms that voters have approved in recent years. And that has to do with Prop 47 and Prop 57. And so basically this ballot measure would change back some things to felonies that voters had changed to be misdemeanors. And then it would also sort of expand the pool of inmates who can qualify for a specific early parole program.
So we're going to be seeing criminal justice issues on the November ballot.
Yeah, it'll be definitely something that voters will be hearing a lot about in 2020.
Well, I want to thank Laurel Rosenhall from CALmatters for joining us. Up next, what do police think of all these changes? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. So what do police officers think about these attempts at criminal justice reform? Our guest is Citrus Heights Police Chief Ron Lawrence, president of the California Police Chiefs Association. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you very much.
So what are your thoughts on AB 392? This is the law that changed when police can use deadly force from when it's reasonable to only using deadly force when necessary. I mean, what do you think that means for police?
Well, at the end of the day, what we've got is good legislation, good law that's going to allow California peace officers to continue to keep our communities safe and at the same time keep themselves safe. You know, in California policing, we always try to be the very best versions of ourselves. And so this is a good dialogue and discussion about how we can improve our industry. And of course, there's no police officer that wants to use force. That's not what we try to do. But we put people, men and women, out there with a badge to enforce the laws that our legislators pass, and we expect them to maintain the rule of law. And to do that, sometimes you have to use force because people resist arrest or they want to attack a police officer or they're attacking somebody else. And so we have to give our police officers the tools that they need to do the
But here we're talking about deadly force. And is there any concern that you have, if you've heard this, that some officers might hesitate in using a deadly force for fear that, you know, does this meet the standard? Is that a concern that you might have?
As a police chief, that's a real concern. We don't want our officers to hesitate. We want them to be very well trained and know from muscle memory exactly what to do in those precise moments. There's always variables. You can't dictate or predict what's going to happen in any particular case. But we can train to just about as many options as we possibly can think of and have our officers trained to do what's necessary in that moment. We don't want to use deadly force. That's the last thing a police officer wants to do. But it's sometimes when it means saving their life or the life of somebody else, then unfortunately deadly force is sometimes necessary.
When we were off camera, I was telling you that I had an uncle that was an assistant chief of police, and I don't think he pulled his weapon in his entire career, maybe once or twice. It's pretty rare for officers to, as a general rule, to pull their weapon, correct?
Well, pull their weapon, no, that happens frequently because we're often in situations that are dangerous and unpredictable. To actually use the weapon, that is actually very rare.
Okay.
I've been in this 30 years and I've never
had to
discharge my firearm.
Fire a shot. Okay, so let me ask you this. There's another companion bill called Senate Bill 230 that would provide officers with more training when it comes to the use of deadly force. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. Now, SB 230, AB 392 deals with the law and the rules of engagement. SB 230 really is the meat of this because that's the training. It's going to provide the training that officers need, and it's going to provide consistent policy throughout California on use of force. And it's going to include that. It's going to ensure that all policies include de-escalation tactics, verbal training and verbal tactics, the necessity to intercede when an officer sees excessive use of force, the duty to render first aid when reasonable and practical to do so. So SB 230 really at the end of the day is going to improve California policing remarkably.
Yeah, it's going to. I think the uniform rules across the board, everybody's playing by the same rules. I think it's probably going to be helpful. Let me ask you about this. There's another law that was bill that was passed, that AB 1215 talks about police using facial recognition software in their body cams. They don't want to use that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a frustrating bill to me, and we oppose that bill for a few reasons. Now, one, we understand people's privacy rights, and California police chiefs, our officers, we don't want to violate anybody's rights. But here's a technology, a piece of useful technology that we can use to locate missing children, to capture and identify suspects, and help us as a tool to do our job. We've always used technology to improve policing in California, all the way back to fingerprints and DNA use, tasers. Technology really is how we will improve our jobs and lower use of force, and facial recognition is yet another iteration of that. To prevent police from using that tool is really kind of hindsighted.
Well, don't you think that some folks are kind of concerned about how this has been misused in some countries, like for example China?
I have no doubt that that's the concern, but I'm here to assure you that that's not the case. The police, we don't have the resources to do what other countries do or spy on people, and that's certainly not what we want to do anyway. Our objective is to keep our communities safe by identifying suspects and criminals, identifying missing children and locating them. And if we've got a tool that can help us, particularly we've got the Olympics coming up in 2028, if we can thwart a terrorism attack before it happens by use of facial recognition, then we need to be able to do that.
Well, let me ask you this. How long have you been in law enforcement?
30 years.
So you've seen a lot of changes in 30 years. So where do you see law enforcement going in the future?
Well, technology, I really think we need to embrace it. I mean, think about this. We're in California. We're at the epicenter of innovation. The Silicon Valley have some of the best and brightest minds in the world for innovation and technology. And I think that policing in California and our nation really needs to use technology to make ourselves better. I mean, you can imagine, you know what a taser gun is. Imagine like a spider web.
Not personally.
No, right. No, I didn't mean to infer that. But like a spider web going out and actually capturing somebody without even using any force other than like a spider web. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but there's innovation, there's tools that we can use, and I think we need to tap into the innovators to really focus technology in policing.
Okay, well, I want to thank Chief of Police Ron Lawrence, the president of the California Police Chiefs Association, excuse me. Up next, what do minority groups think? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. The headline-grabbing stories of police shootings have led some organizations to demand action. One of those is the NAACP. Our guest is Alice Hoffman, the president of the California chapter of the NAACP. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So, what are your thoughts regarding California's changing standard when it comes to the police use of deadly force from a reasonable standard to only using it when necessary?
Well, it's long overdue. The police have had a Bill of Rights that gives them call over the citizens. They can do whatever they want, just say, I fear for my life, and they could do anything, really. So this this bill, police use of force, is something that, you know, she had a hard time getting it. Took a couple of years. It was negotiated, and it's something that we look forward to, and it's well overdue. Now, will it improve the policing for people of color? That remains to be seen. That's the big question, That
right?
remains to be seen, yes.
Well, some of the statistics are kind of startling. You know, there was a nationwide statistic, a study found that 1 out of 1,000 black men and boys can expect to die at the hands of law enforcement.
That's right.
That's a pretty high statistic. They say that young adults are the most at risk. It peaks between 20 and 35. In the 20s are particularly dangerous, and 1.6% of all deaths by black men between 20 and 24 occur at the hands of the police.
At the hands of the police.
That's a pretty high statistic.
It is a high statistic, and they say if you're on the police. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not against police. I believe we need them. I believe that there are police that abuse the power, and then there are police that use the power because they're afraid. And we need a different standard.
Well, let me add, that's actually a good segue to my next question, and that is this question of training police officers. There's another bill, SB 230, that would provide officers more training in the use of deadly force. Good idea?
Yes, it's a good idea, because whenever they've always had a standard that they used. Now they have to use another standard. Now there's, you know, when do I use it? What do I do? All the questions that they have. And just to give them training is a good thing, because then they can't say, well, I wasn't trained and I didn't know, and you know, it's a good thing for all of us.
Yeah, and I think they're also talking about de-escalation techniques, so you don't run to force initially, you try other techniques before you have to get to use of deadly force.
Right.
Okay, what about, there's another a few bills I want to chat with you about. One is SB 1215. It places a 3-year moratorium on police officers using facial recognition software in body cams. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, facial recognition is good, but on my race of people, it doesn't always come out the way they think it should. You can't always tell people of color. A lot of people are caught up in, you know, now they use facial recognition for everything. But you can see the difference in facial recognition. And I think they just need to get it a little bit more refined, a little bit more reliable, and then maybe they can do it.
Well, actually, the studies seem to support what you're saying. There was an MIT study that said that software more often misidentified darker-skinned people, particularly women of color. The error rate was almost 35% for darker-skinned women, compared to less than 1% for lighter skinned males.
Yeah.
So it does seem to.
Well, it does the males, but not the females. Huh?
Right. For some reason, I have no idea why, but that's the MIT study results. There's another bill that was passed in this kind of same area, and that is AB 1183, and it talks about additional oversight for sheriff's offices, county sheriff's offices. Do you think that's necessary?
Yes.
Why?
Because the sheriff is all law enforcement, all government agencies are subject to a law. They subject to the rule of law, and the sheriff is just running. I love him, but he's running rapid over his use of power. He believes.
You're talking specifically about Sacramento.
Yes,
Okay.
But it's true in most sheriff's departments. He believes that he doesn't have to answer to the law. He believes that his office is removed. That's bad. But it's also bad across the state, across the country, because we have sheriffs that are good, we have sheriffs that are bad, and we need a bill, we know, to rein them in, the ones that are bad, and do whatever you can do.
You're talking about being accountable for your actions and also transparency.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, this sheriff, he doesn't have to be transparent. He says that whatever he does is okay.
Yeah.
And that's not true. That's not right.
Oh, well, that will probably change things. Let me ask you about another one. In terms of law enforcement, let's talk about law enforcement going into the future.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you see law enforcement changing as we move forward?
Well, I think Ms. Weber's bill is a good indicator of where we're going. Use of force is something that they should really think about. Community policing is something that we all have aspired to. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the panacea, but at least people are out in the community, they know the people in the community, and they know that when they kill somebody that they're killing a neighbor, a friend, or whatever. And so I think policing is going to move from where it is now to somewhere in the middle, and then somewhere toward where we all believe it should be, community policing.
Do you see community policing as being one of the tools in the toolbox?
Oh, definitely. It is a tool in the toolbox, but if used properly.
Yeah.
You know, and all of this stuff, all this policing, still requires policemen who are sensitive. And so you're going to have some outliers who aren't going to do this stuff, and they'll stand out. Mm-hmm. But most policing and policemen would use it, and I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah, I think probably most are doing it for the right reason. There are a few bad apples in any occupation, but most are doing it for the right reason and trying to do a good job.
They are. And,
Okay.
And I think that's what's important to remember.
Okay, well, I want to thank our guest, Alice Hoffman, the president of the California chapter of the NAACP, also our other guests, Chief Ron Lawrence, who's the president of the California Police Chiefs Association, and Laurel Rosenhall with CalMatters for joining us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.